Hey, what's going on? My name's Lucas. Welcome to my studio. In this video, I'm going to be comparing Ableton Live, Pro Tools, and Cubase. This video is going to talk specifically about music, so composition, production, mixing, and mastering, and it's geared towards people of all levels, from beginners to seasoned professionals like myself. So first of all, why am I even doing this? I've been crazy enough to learn these 3 DAWs over the years because I've been chasing workflow for myself and trying to find the most reliable software for me and my clients' music. This video is meant to help you so you don't have to go through that whole process and you can choose the best software that fits your needs. This video is going to be divided into 3 sections. So the first section, I'm going to be talking about the pros and cons of each software and showing you some unique features to them, as well as discussing some specific things that they lack compared to the others. In the second section, I'm going to be ranking each program in order based off of specific criteria I've come up with that are the most important considerations that you need to keep in mind when you're shopping around for software. And in the third section, I'm going to be explaining who I think the ideal user is for each program. I chose these 3 programs because I'm proficient at using them and they're also available cross-platform for Windows and Mac. So starting with Ableton, the pros of Ableton are it's very minimalist, it's very quick and snappy, it's incredibly stable, and it has a great browser workflow. The main cons of Ableton are a lack of audio editing features, not as great of a mixer as the other 2, and not as much depth of customization. But I'm going to walk you through right now a couple unique features of Ableton that the other programs don't have. The first thing about Ableton, as I mentioned, is it's super fast to open up. So to get an idea running, you can open up Ableton and it's really quick. It's also very snappy, and it's the only program that actually lets you reliably drag audio effects and things in the middle of a session while you're recording, and it doesn't really mess with playback, so I think that's a really huge feature about Ableton. This interface is much more minimalist than the other ones. There are a lot of like small buttons and things like that, but compared to Cubase and Pro Tools, quite a lot less, and we don't really have any dedicated tools and things up here. I really love how you can do keyboard mapping and MIDI mapping right here on the main page, so that's great. First of all, let's look at changing tempos of a session, which is one thing that the other programs don't quite do as well. If we just play this back, notice how I can just change the tempo of the session while I'm playing back, and it's amazing. I mean, you don't have to click anything, you don't have to set anything up. It's one of the best things about working with Ableton. Another thing that I really love about Ableton that I wanted to show you are these audio effect racks. So it's amazing to have your plugins right here in the same view as everything, and you don't have to open anything up to adjust your EQ or compressor. And you can create these things called audio effect racks where you can map these macros to any of these. So it's really awesome that you have all this built right into the main window. So that's a huge thing that none of the other programs have. The next thing that Ableton does that doesn't seem like any other DAW has really done is something called hot swapping. So I have a snare trigger right here. So let's say I want to change the snare sound in the middle of playing back. So we can open up the sampler track here and press this hot swap button. It'll open up my splice samples and I can change different snares. I'm going to show you how that works. It's amazing, and I haven't really found any other program that does that as well. So the next thing I wanted to show you is how easy warping is in Ableton. This is a very, very unique thing because warping is a little bit more of a pain in the other programs. So I just have my guitar track right here, and I wanted to change the timing slightly so I can insert warp markers and change the timing like this, and it sounds very, very good. It's not like a complicated thing to do. You don't need to, open up extra windows or anything. It's all right here, and it works really well. Another thing Ableton has that's really cool is Max for Live. So it's an ecosystem where you can design your own plugins, and they have a marketplace where you can download third-party plugins. So I think that's really neat, and the other programs don't have that option. Another thing that Ableton Live does that is getting copied by other programs now, but Ableton really led the way with this, is Clip View, which you can use for live performance as well as production. Of course, the program is geared towards playing live, so that's a key feature here, and Pro Tools, amongst other DAWs, are trying to copy this, but this one's the best one by far. Okay, now just a quick note about some specific things that Ableton is lacking. So number 1, it's lacking offline processing, which you'll see later in Pro Tools and Cubase. The other thing it's lacking are audio editing key commands, but I've been able to circumvent that by using a program called Keyboard Maestro, and it's a whole other topic, but you can check that out if you need more advanced keyboard shortcuts in Ableton. And the third thing it's lacking is ARA support if you want to use Melodyne or Vocal Line or something like that built right into the interface. That does not work in Ableton, unfortunately, and you can do that in Pro Tools and Cubase. Now we're going to talk about Pro Tools. So the main pros to using Pro Tools are its robust features for audio editing, mixing, and its useful tools and windows for both of those things. So we can see here we have a really handy tracks view which helps you navigate larger sessions easily, as well as a groups feature that is probably the best out of any DAW, where you can create groups for any instruments that you need to edit together. And as you can see here, these drums, I have a group and you can uncheck it there. So that's really sweet. You can use ARA plugins. So for example, Melodyne is built in right into the Pro Tools interface. So that's really cool. It's not available in Ableton. Let's check out the Pro Tools mixer, which is really sleek. It has everything that you need. It's customizable, and it's just the closest thing to mixing on an analog console if that's what you're looking for. I just wanted to show you two quick audio editing functions in Pro Tools that I think are pretty neat. So we have something called Beat Detective right here. We have this drum part selected, and what it'll do is it'll separate clips and do a bunch of functions that will print right to the timeline here. So Cubase does something similar to this, but I think this workflow is really great with Beat Detective. Another thing that you can do in Cubase and Pro Tools that you cannot do in Ableton. Pro Tools is called Audio Suite plugins, and in Cubase it's called Direct Offline Processing, but let's say we want to apply reverb right to the audio files here, we can just do that. So that's really, really neat for adding effects and things to your tracks. Another quick thing that I wanted to show you is tab to transient. So let's say we want to just get to this snare hit, we can just hit tab and edit right there. So it's really, really fast audio editing. We have these useful tools and different modes here that are very quick. Let's look at MIDI editing in Pro Tools, which some might argue is its weak point. So Pro Tools is very, very robust for MIDI editing, but it's not quite as easy to use as some of the other programs. So you'll see here you can't collapse or fold down the keyboard, and you also can't rename it to use it for drum programming and stuff like that, so that's a little annoying. You do have some windows that pop up here that do very advanced MIDI editing features, so that's great, but you need to open up a separate window to access those. So a couple things that Pro Tools is lacking, really just production related plugins and sounds, some MIDI features like folding the piano roll and renaming the MIDI keys so you can use it for drum programming, stuff like that. It doesn't really do it like Ableton and Cubase. Alright, so for Cubase, the main pros are that it has really deep customizability, a ton of features, great MIDI editing, a great mixer, and the cons are it's definitely the most cluttered and clunky out of all of them. It is pretty complicated to use, it takes a long time to get started, can be a little quirky, and there's no trackpad functionality if you're using a laptop. The first thing I wanted to show you is something called macros that's amazing. So you can essentially program Cubase to do multiple things at once with one key command, and you do that here in the key commands window. This is really neat, and I've never seen anything like it. So another really cool thing that Cubase has that I've never seen before is something called the logical editor. What you can do here is you can program Boolean logic to have Cubase do specific things for you in sequence with key commands. So it's really awesome. You can use it for MIDI editing, for mixing, for a bunch of stuff. It can rename tracks, it can color code stuff. It's pretty much endless. So really cool. I've never seen anything like it before. I wanted to show you something that Cubase does that's really cool with MIDI editing. So we have the MIDI editor open here for our strings. We can actually do something called chord editing, where say we want to add a major 7 chord right here. You click it and boom. So really, really cool. I've never seen that before. Next thing that Cubase does that's super cool is it has a dedicated drum editor. So you can rename all the tracks, edit your drums, fold it down. It's really, really handy. The audio editor in Cubase is really handy as well. So you can create something called hit points, where Cubase will automatically detect and analyze your audio, find hit points, and you can slice it, add markers, or warp it, which is really, really nice. Another thing that's really cool about Cubase is you can add auto fades to the whole project, so Cubase will automatically add fades to your audio tracks so you can worry about writing music and not about editing audio. So I think that's really cool, and you can disable it on certain tracks if you don't need it. Next, let's check out the mixer in Cubase, which is absolutely gorgeous. It has so many interesting features and it's really fun to use. It saves the history of everything that you do, and it also can save snapshots of everything. So the Cubase mixer is very robust. Everything's customizable. Another thing that it has that's cool is this quick link button. So if I select 2 tracks and hit Q link, anything that I move is temporarily linked. You can add inserts and dial those in and it'll do it exactly the same to both tracks. And when you're done, you disable quick link. One other really unique thing that Cubase has is something called Control Room. So this is basically like a virtual monitoring control ecosystem that you can use to route cues, to change your levels, and it even has a beautiful meter here. But one other thing that's cool is it actually allows you to put plugins on here that are not on your stereo out. It's only affecting what you're hearing through your monitors. This is just an included plugin with Cubase called Supervision. I've never seen anything like this included with the DAW, so check this out. You have customizable modules that you can use for metering, so I'll play back some audio and you can see what it's doing. There's a host of different modules that you can use to monitor your audio, and the best part is that this is not even on the stereo output. This is just on your monitoring setup, so it won't affect your bounces. Now, the last interesting thing that I wanted to show you about Cubase is this export window is much more robust than the other programs. So you can do multiple exports where you can select your stereo out as well as whichever groups and stems that you want. And when you hit export, it'll do it all in one run. You can set up special naming conventions. So it'll take name, channel name, and those types of things with a separator. So that's really neat for organizing your multi-tracks and stems. Alright, so what is Cubase lacking? So as you can see, it probably has the most amount of features compared to the other ones, but some of the preferences and functions that the other DAWs have built in automatically, you have to actually custom program in Cubase, which can take a lot of time. Next, I'm going to be ranking these 3 programs in order based off of 7 different criteria that I came up with that I think are most important to consider when you're shopping around. Number 1 is learning curve. Number 2 is workflow. Number 3 is reliability and stability. Number 4 is customization. Number 5 is features. Number 6 is included plugins and sounds. And number 7 is price point. Number 1 for learning curve, this is an easy one because Ableton is by far the easiest to use out of the 3. Coming in second is Pro Tools, which is actually pretty hard to use, but once you get around to kind of getting used to it, then it becomes pretty intuitive. And lastly is Cubase, which is by far the hardest to use. Number 2 is workflow. So workflow is going to be a lot trickier to rank. I'll definitely say that Ableton is the fastest program to use out of all 3. It's faster to open, you can drag and drop effects while recording and while playing back audio. There's really just like one way of doing specific things in Ableton, and same thing for Pro Tools. For Pro Tools, the workflow is amazing for audio editing, but a little bit cumbersome for music production, so it can be a little slow for doing certain things. In Cubase, sometimes there will be 2 or 3 ways of doing one specific task, so there's a lot of options. It has a very robust workflow, but like I've been saying, it's not quite as easy to use as the other 2. Number 3 for reliability and stability. So this is a tricky category just because this could vary depending on your system, but Ableton, in my experience, is the most stable, assuming that your third-party plugins aren't causing you problems. I've had a lot of problems with Pro Tools crashing and not being able to open old sessions, so I can't say that Pro Tools is the most reliable, and I would also say that it's going to be much harder to run, especially if you're using like a laptop or a Mac Mini or a computer that doesn't quite have as much CPU power. Similarly, Cubase also seems to be very reliable, but the common thread between all 3 of these programs is usually that my third-party plugins cause them to crash, and that can be a problem. But for the most part, I would say that Ableton's the most reliable. It's also designed to do live performance. I've never had it crash when I've been playing live, and that's the end of that story. Number 4 for customization, Cubase is clearly the most robust as far as customizing things. You can customize everything, macros, logical editor, key commands, is pretty much endless. Pro Tools does let you customize key commands, but it's not nearly as customizable. And Ableton does actually let you customize a decent amount of things, but it's pretty minimalist. Number 6 is included plugins and sounds. This is a really interesting category that's extremely important. So I would say the leader in this group is Cubase. Cubase has a wealth of included plugins for production, composition, mixing and mastering. You can pretty much do everything in the box. It even has some sample libraries of strings and pianos that are very, very good, and definitely could compete with some third-party libraries that you would have to buy. The second pick for me is going to be Ableton. Ableton has great plugins included and some decent sounds, but it's plenty of material to get started. And last for me is Pro Tools, with one big asterisk, is that Pro Tools plugins are amazing for mixing, but I would say their plugins for production and simple things like beat making and just basically included sounds are pretty weak. Number 7 is pricing and updates. Cubase and Ableton are fairly close at around $600 one-time purchase, although you do have to pay for updates, whereas Pro Tools is $299 a year, so Pro Tools is much more expensive. Now, as far as updates for these programs, I would say that Pro Tools has more consistent updates that are obviously included in your subscription, so they do kind of more gradual updates over the course of the year. Whereas Cubase has a new update around once a year or once every 2 years, something like that, where you do have to pay. And Ableton does the least frequent updates, where you have to pay for a major update, but they do update the software periodically, and it does it automatically. That fixes things like bugs and stuff like that, but it doesn't add any major features. Alright, so for the last section, I'm going to be talking about the ideal user for these 3 programs. So for Ableton, the ideal user is a musician, music producer, artist, and live performer / DJ. Because of the fact that it has such an intuitive and streamlined workflow, you can really focus on doing music, and it's not as robust for audio editing. It has a great browser workflow with drag and drop, so if you're making beats and stuff like that, you can access all your samples really easily. For Pro Tools, the ideal user is audio engineers and mixing engineers. It's clearly tailored towards recording, audio editing, and mixing, and is quite a bit more clunky for music production. One of the things that makes it quite a bit different from Ableton and Cubase is that Pro Tools browser is not quite as seamlessly integrated, so it's not as good for browsing samples and making beats and things like that you would probably want to do in Ableton or Cubase. For Cubase, the ideal user is a composer or a music producer that's very demanding when it comes to workflow and customization. Cubase seems like it'd be suited best for advanced MIDI techniques, advanced audio editing functions, and writing music when you have more complicated things going on, like different time signatures and just stuff that requires extra care to program. So to me, Cubase works best for composition, like classical music or progressive metal. I also think Cubase's mixer is the best out of the 3, so if you're really into mixing and mastering, but you're willing to deal with the workflow and the customization, Cubase would definitely be worth checking out. Let me know if this video was helpful. I would love to hear in the comments which DAW you're using. And don't forget to check out my website, the link's in the description. You can directly support this channel by getting some of my sample packs and templates on there. I'll catch you guys in the next video. My name's Lucas. Have a good one.